So I think one of the first things to think about is really how we're going to be proactive as HR leaders to guide our business to navigate what a lot of these mega trends are going to do to our organizations. So as CHROs, I think it's important to have this view around what is happening in the external world, to have specific triggers that you can identify and then ask that question to say, but what does that mean for my business? And how can we take proactive decisions that puts us in a better position to respond to what's happening in the world? I think unfortunately that's probably on the lower side of things, and I think there's a couple of reasons for that. And I think firstly, unfortunately in a lot of organizations, HR's role is still seen as very internal. I can remember I still spoke to one of the CEOs that I worked with in the past, and I was talking about something that was happening in the world outside, and he said, that's interesting, but that's not your job. So I think we still struggle with that legitimacy almost around the fact that HR's role is both external and internal to the organization. I think similarly we find that unfortunately a lot of HR leaders are still fighting fires from a day-to-day point of view, and let's be honest, mega trends are not that interesting if I'm fighting what's right in front of me at the moment. So I think there is that thing around helping HR leaders to think about a different time horizon on which they also need to operate. And then to your point, how do we help HR leaders make sense of what is happening in the world outside? How do we help them interpret? How do we help them internalize and then make sense of what they are seeing and what that means for them and the actions that they need to take? There's a couple of things you can do, and I think the first thing starts with you have to be curious about what's happening in the world outside. My personal experience, I think a lot of HR leaders lose their curiosity as they grow in their careers. And what I mean by curiosity is find out what's happening outside of HR, outside of business, in other domains and in other industries. Industries will also shift and respond to mega trends at different points in time. So I think as an HR leader, if you keep your eyes open and you build your external network to understand what's happening outside of your own ecosystem, that really puts you in a much better position to be able to respond when things finally do arrive at your front door. I think formal education plays a role, but I would also say you need to mix that a lot more just by staying in the loop, staying in the know, and being part of the conversation. I find HR communities to a large extent, and HR leaders are very guilty of this, like to consume, don't like to contribute. And I think that has to change if you are going to form part of that conversation around where things are going. I think one of the big challenges we do face is that I think a lot of people are overwhelmed by information these days, right? So I think there is new tools that you can utilize that just helps you get a snapshot view of what is happening in the world by staying in the loop. So I think, equip yourself by using the right types of technologies as an HR leader to stay abreast of what is happening, in the field, and in particular key topics that that is of interest to you in your organization. I think the other one that I've already mentioned is build a diverse network of people from other disciplines that you can engage with and ask them from time to time, and something that I also do, simple question, what are you working on at the moment? What's keeping you awake at night? Because I do think that sometimes we get into this point where we engage with the same people that do the same things that we do on a daily basis, and I think that has to be a little bit more intentional from our side to make that slightly broader. And I think the last one there is sometimes to admit if you hear something and you don't know what it is, to stand up and ask the question, to say, hang on, I don't quite know what this is, help me understand what that means for me. Because that interpretation is really, really important. And I've sat in a lot of boardrooms where HR professionals don't participate in certain conversations because they say, I don't think that's quite that relevant for me. It probably is, but you haven't made that connection yet, and you're only going to make that connection by asking the question from a different perspective. And that's really important. We need to speak up a lot more so that we can make those dots and join them for ourselves, and that's the only way that we can then kind of pass that information on and be prepared differently in future. So I think there's a couple of companies that are doing it really well. So in our client base, there's often I speak to the CHROs, I've got certain catch-ups with them from time to time. And the ones that I think do it really well are already asking us the questions about, we've seen this happening, what does that mean for us? Or we've started to pick up this particular trend or pulse in our own business, how's that playing out elsewhere? So I think the ones that do it really, really well, they've got a very good grasp on their own organization in terms of what's really happening. And I'm not talking about all the formal channels, the more informal stuff that they're starting to see and the pulse of the organization. And they are curious enough to want to go and connect it elsewhere, and then they ask the questions and they include people in that particular network. So those CHROs that are much more proactive about that conversation, staying abreast of megatrends is not, you invite somebody to come and speak once a year at your strategy meeting. That's not what staying abreast means at all. So it's those that continuously are in that particular conversation, get a lot of queries whenever we put out material of that nature. Some of those CHROs coming back and saying, I've seen that in my business, but the other two trends you've spoken about, I haven't realized that that's something that we should be thinking about. What does that mean? I think some good examples of companies that really do this well. We've got a big client in the media industry, and something that they do is they take their top potential succession pool for CHROs in future, and they take them through a 12-month long program where they actually engage with different trends through different parts of their particular business. Very proactive in terms of the discussion around how do they take that back to their business, and this is an active, structured part of stepping into a future HR leadership role within their organization, which I think works really, really well. Insurance business, multinational insurance business that we also work with, they also do this on quite a frequent touch point basis, and then they also follow and share a lot of trend-like information with their entire HR community throughout the course of the year at set points, especially when they are either preparing for strategy or on the other side when they are reflecting on performance, which I think is also really, really good. Last one, we've got a client that does something that they call a template takeover, which is that they would take something out and say, what does this mean for our business? And then they would have like a set template to go and explore and investigate in their business. What would be the impact if this mega trend would hit us? What are we doing about that as well? Which I think is quite innovative to start the conversation, at least, about how would we respond in future when this starts to happen.